right, great. Well, thanks, everybody. I'm real excited about this session. That's why I volunteered to do this part. I'm going to do a fireside chat with Erik Voorhees, who, as I mentioned earlier, is a very, very early adopter. If you saw the movie Rise and Rise of Bitcoin, you could see him running around talking about this crazy technology way, way, way before almost anyone else was. And he's also done all kinds of neat things. He's done startups, and he's really well known in this space. He does a lot of very good writing. You can check out his blog, and he's just very well known in this community. And I'm happy to be doing this. So real excited about it. So we're going to do just kind of fireside chat. I'm going to ask some questions, kind of interview format, and then we're going to have you join in. And also, if you followed, especially if you follow things, how many people follow Reddit? Everybody, pretty much. So you probably saw this thing with this fellow from named Ken Hess from ZDNet, who wrote one of the most negative articles about Bitcoin. And Erik, as he's done a few times to people who are big critics, he challenged him to a debate. And we didn't hear, nobody heard anything back. So I tweeted Ken and I said, hey, how about Dubai Bitcoin Conference for the debate? What a perfect venue, because I know Erik's going to be there. And he said, well, you're going to pay my ticket to Dubai? And I said, yeah, I will, actually. So Ken Hess, come on up. Ken? Ken? So Ken didn't make it. Yeah, there you go. I did get a little bit of criticism. People say, seriously, you're going to give that guy a ticket? I want a ticket. No, Ken couldn't make it. Ironically, it was government who prevented him from coming. He has to get permission to go where he would have wanted to go. Either that, or maybe he watched a couple of Erik's videos and decided he might have been outmatched. I did promise him if he had come, we would have been respectful and polite and respectful of his opinions and had a healthy debate. So I'm not going to pick on him too much. I had a little fun, inviting him on stage. We knew he wasn't going to be here. But what we can do is cover some of the things that maybe Ken would have asked. I went through some of his tweets, and some of the questions. It's hard for me to play the role of critic, but we can go ahead and ask. So first question: will you pay my way to Dubai? Okay, we got that one. Is Bitcoin a Ponzi scheme?
Yeah, so Ponzi scheme is one of those words that a lot of the haters throw around very quickly. And I think they do it because they've seen how fast Bitcoin has risen. And usually things that bring that kind of return in that amount of time are scams. So it's understandable to be skeptical. But a Ponzi scheme is a scheme and not a legitimate enterprise because there's no real business that it's operating. It's not doing anything of value. So you can usually disprove the Ponzi scheme argument pretty easily by just demonstrating that Bitcoin has value. And you can debate about how valuable it is, but as long as you can show that it's useful, it can't really be a Ponzi scheme. So the easiest way to demonstrate it's valuable is to just send money to someone halfway around the world with almost no fee and no one saying you can't do it. The service of moving money around the world is valuable, and therefore, if it works, then Bitcoin can't be a Ponzi scheme.
Great, thanks. So how can we wrap our heads around dealing with a money that doesn't have a central bank and doesn't have a money supply regulation?
So most people don't pay much attention to money. And this is amazing because everyone spends their time, most of their lives, chasing after it, working all day long for it, and yet they don't understand the nature of it. The way that we have money now with central banks is more of an exception to the rule than the way money has traditionally worked in the past. Money has typically been based on some sort of commodity. Gold and silver was historically money. And it's really only been since 1971 that the world's monetary system has been completely detached from gold. So we're really living in an exception to the rule, an experiment with fiat money that's only about 40 years old. So of course money can work without a central bank and without the fiat, the government managing it, because that's how it's typically worked throughout history. I think it's incumbent on the people that argue for fiat to explain why it will continue to work when they continue to print it and debase it and it loses its value perpetually every year.
So it's not backed by anything. How do you address that?
Yeah, so that's a much better argument than just the Ponzi scheme one. Most people think, if you study money a little bit, you realize that money should be backed by something of value. That's why a lot of people argue that the gold standard should be returned. But the thing is that things that are useful do not need backing. So while dollars should probably have backing of gold because gold is valuable, what's gold backed by? It's not backed by anything. And that's because gold itself is useful. It is useful as a money. And in the same way, other things that are useful don't require backing. So your car, it's not backed by anything. Food is not backed by anything. Most things that you use every day are not backed by things. They are useful in and of themselves. So Bitcoin is the same way. It doesn't require backing because Bitcoin is useful. I can use it. It has a price. I can send a value with that anywhere in the world instantly. That's useful, and thus backing is not needed.
Right. So why would somebody need privacy?
So Bitcoin gives us privacy that people are not used to having in the financial world. And this has been one of its most contentious issues because there's sort of this sense that if you're not doing anything wrong, why do you need to hide? And everyone has curtains on their windows at home. Everyone has a door that locks. And why is that? Why do you need that privacy in your own life? Why do you have a door on the bathroom? Why do you not let strangers into your home? These are all things that are taken as normal because people deserve to have privacy by default. You shouldn't need permission to have privacy. You don't have to go to the government to get a license to put curtains on your windows. You don't have to get a license to put locks on your car door. Privacy is just understood in other areas of life, and yet for some reason it's not understood when it comes to money. Fortunately, Bitcoin has granted people financial privacy for the first time in a very long time, and hopefully people will understand that that's a virtue and not a bug, and they will come to respect that every person has the right to financial privacy in the same way that they have the right to privacy in other areas of their life.
Great. One of the contentions of the ZDNet article, I think the headline was, Senator declares Bitcoin illegal. Do you think that was an accurate headline?
Yeah, of course it was not accurate at all. The senator had told this Ken Hess guy that Bitcoin was not legal tender. Of course.
So is tender an important word?
It's a very important word because, yeah.
So now wait a minute, are donuts legal tender?
They're not, and that's why
donuts are illegal.
Yes.
I hope nobody here is eating any donuts.
Yes. There's a whole shelf of pastries out there that should probably be taken away.
These Pellegrino bottles, are those legal tender?
They're not, so those are also illegal.
So that must mean they're illegal.
Yeah, all sorts of things
So
are
the
illegal.
word tender means something in this context.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's grasping to find reasons why people should stay clear of Bitcoin. Legal tender is a very important concept. It's why fiat currency has any value at all, because people are forced to use it. So you're forced to pay government taxes in fiat. You're forced to settle debts in fiat. And this all comes from legal tender laws. So the reason that you use dollars or dirhams or euros is because there are laws that require you to do so. And so that gives the currency value even if there's nothing backing it, like something useful like gold. So of course Bitcoin is not legal tender. You're not forced to settle debts with it, but that doesn't mean it's illegal. It just means it's not coerced into the market. It just comes into the market as an entrant.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I think we've seen guidance from FinCEN and the IRS and the fact that the government has owned Bitcoins and for until recently was one of the largest holders of Bitcoin, so certainly that says something about it as well. One of the other tweets, and boy, this is painful, trying to be Ken Hess up here. So I think there's one other point I can make, and then we'll move on to more fun things. He said you can't buy anything with it.
Yeah, of course that's not true at all. You can buy all sorts of things with it. He just hasn't done any homework, I guess.
Have you heard of any companies, say, I don't know, yesterday that might have decided they're accepting Bitcoin?
Little companies like Microsoft now accept it, but they're really, who cares about Microsoft?
Does Microsoft have very much sales volume?
I don't know, a few dollars.
Anybody heard of Microsoft here? Bought a product of theirs, maybe? One guy?
The argument that you can't buy anything with it used to be valid. When I got into Bitcoin, it was fairly accurate that you couldn't really spend it other than a few weird merchants on the internet. You couldn't spend Bitcoin anywhere. And a lot of critics just sort of saw that state and they said, well, you can't buy anything with it, therefore you never will be able to. So a lot of the people that got involved in Bitcoin early had the great leap of imagination to realize that just because people aren't acting in a certain way today doesn't mean that they won't tomorrow. And because Bitcoin is so useful for purchases, it's more private, it's faster, it's cheaper, it's more secure. People now can spend it on millions of items all over the world. It's only been a few years.
Great. So we'll move on from the Ken Hess portion. Thanks, Ken, if you're watching. We're happy to have a real debate. You're game for that, right?
Of course. Yeah.
All right. I'll host it. We can do it in person or Skype or what's that other thing? Google Hangouts, whatever. I think, and this goes for any critic. I think, not to speak for Erik, but I think Erik would probably debate just about anybody. And if he's not available, I know there's a lot of other people who would. The people who are passionate about this in this space, and it can be healthy to have a debate. It's great to ask these questions. In all honesty, I think you're probably quite a bit out of Ken's league. I'd like to see you debate somebody who has maybe thought about these things a lot more, and has maybe more credentials. And it would be great. Maybe there's something we haven't thought of. Maybe there's something that somebody can bring up in a debate that makes us think a little bit, change our opinion.
Well, ultimately, Bitcoin is a debate in itself. It's the entire world debating whether money can actually be done privately by individuals instead of by governments. So every day that you're using Bitcoin, you are demonstrating the argument that this actually works. And the debate is clearly being won. It was not won when it started, and every day that goes by that Bitcoin grows, the debate is becoming clearer and clearer that this is actually something legitimate. So as much fun as it is to talk about it, all you need to do is use it, and you kind of win the argument.
Yeah. I'm really interested in what you said about being early and how that was a valid argument when you started. I mean, I was pretty early in the space, and you were way earlier than I was. And I'm fascinated by our friends, mutual friends of ours that were very early along with you, who were out there. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's like? And also sort of, you've had the opportunity, because of being so early, you've been able to explain Bitcoin a lot more to a lot of people. So what has that kind of process been like, and what have you learned from that?
Well, when I got involved, I didn't think I was early. Bitcoin was already a few years old, and the story of Bitcoin is that you always want to have been earlier than you were. Everyone in this room is still extremely early. Most people do not use Bitcoin. Most people around the world have not heard of Bitcoin. It is still a cutting-edge technology that the world has not yet adopted. So everyone's still early, and that's a good thing. It's been hard convincing people that the way that they've grown up on money is illegitimate. It's something that people don't want to hear. People have an implicit trust that the dollars that they work their lives for have a value and a reason for existing. And they don't like to hear that a bunch of weird people are setting up an alternative that could replace the entire banking system and all the power that governments wield over money. So that's a very controversial position to take. And so Bitcoin has not just been like adopting Facebook or Twitter. It has this sort of ideological world behind it and certain implications that a lot of people have a hard time digesting. So that's been a really hard thing to get across to people, but over time I think they're starting to understand that maybe Bitcoin shows us that money is a good just like any other, and it should be handled by the marketplace instead of by a monopoly government.
Great. So you've had the opportunity to explain Bitcoin to a lot of people, and I ask you a lot of questions, but this is a basic one that I've never asked, so I'm really curious how you would answer. If you're in an elevator, you have your kind of 30, 60-second elevator pitch, and somebody says who has absolutely no idea what this technology is. Because I think all of us who are passionate about the space, we're always interested in better ways to explain it to people. How do you explain it?
I try to explain that you have to understand Bitcoin as two individual things, and they both have the same name. And this was a problem, and they probably should have been given different names, but they have the same name. The two things are Bitcoin is a payment network, and you can think of a payment network like PayPal is a payment network. The SWIFT network is a payment network. All the interbank systems of moving money around the world, those are all payment networks. Bitcoin is a new payment network. And the second thing is that it is a currency itself. So like the dollar and the euro and the yen, these are all currencies, and now we have another currency added to that list called Bitcoin. So you use the Bitcoin payment network to send the Bitcoin currency anywhere instantly, almost for free, and no one can stop a payment. And really, you don't need to get much more detailed than that, and most people will kind of understand that there's something interesting there.
What objections do you hear that you think are most valid or most interesting to you?
One objection is always that Bitcoin is too volatile to be useful, and this has a lot of truth to it. Normal people do not want to be Forex traders. They do not want to be speculating on the value of their bank account every day. Bitcoin is more stable than it used to be, but it still swings wildly. A 5% move in a day is not very uncommon. And that makes people very uncomfortable. Even if the trend has been to appreciate over time, Bitcoin scares people because of the volatility. So that's why companies like BitPay have been so successful. They removed the volatility from the merchant. So someone who wants to accept Bitcoin, they don't want to speculate on the value, they just want to sell their goods. And BitPay takes the Bitcoin from the customer, converts it instantly into dollars, and then pays them dollars. So it's removed the volatility from the merchant. Companies like Coinapult are doing the same thing now for the user, removing the volatility from the actual user, so you can have Bitcoin, lock it to a more stable asset like dollars or gold, and now you can exist in the cryptocurrency universe without actually having to own fiat or anything like that, or use bank accounts. So that's the most legitimate criticism, and it's something that can't be designed away. Volatility gets solved over time as the market grows, and entrepreneurs figure out ways to solve the problem for different use cases.
Great. I'm interested in maybe you could talk a little bit more about Coinapult. What it is, how did it become? Now you created it, right? Ira's
back
Ira.
here.
Okay, and Ira's the CEO now.
Yep.
And you were CEO and stepped down?
In February.
So what is Coinapult? How does it work? Maybe go into a little more detail about how do you lock the value of it? Who are your customers, that kind of thing?
So Coinapult started as a wallet software, basically just a safe place that you can store your Bitcoins, an easy website that you can have Bitcoin stored and send and receive with other people. That's its basic functionality. It also offers merchant processing and liquidity services to businesses. But the locks product especially is sort of what Coinapult's pushing now. And it's quite simple, really. The idea is simple. It's just if you have $1,000 worth of Bitcoin today, tomorrow it could be worth a little bit more or less, or a lot more or less, and that's scary. So wouldn't it be nice if your Bitcoin balance tomorrow was also $1,000, and a week from now is also $1,000, and a year from now is the same? That would give you a lot more confidence to use Bitcoin in a business or in a normal setting. And so that's what Coinapult offers. The way that it does that, if you send Coinapult $1,000 worth of Bitcoin and you lock it to dollars, Coinapult will be selling those Bitcoins and owes you $1,000 worth of Bitcoin until you've gotten rid of the lock. So Coinapult's not taking currency risk either. It's simply backing up your Bitcoin position with dollars in a bank somewhere. But the key is that you don't have to have the bank yourself. You don't have to have a bank account to use it. So that opens up Bitcoin to several billion people, and that's the idea.
Wow, that's amazing. And when did this idea come about?
August of 2013. And when did it release, Ira? Like a few months ago.
Yeah, August of 2014.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I think that's profound. It's really something that is worth thinking about, because that some of the main objections that people have are either being solved or already solved, and it's a superior model in every way. When Ira booked his hotel for this, we had a package with the conference, and he paid with Bitcoin that was actually represented by gold, and he sent it to basically through London, ended up with my assistant. My assistant took it off of her phone and said, "What would you like me to do with these coins?" And I said, "Well, when I get there, I'll pay the bill with my credit card, but for now, just put it on my paper wallet." And I pulled a piece of paper out of my pocket, and that's where these gold-backed coins ended up. So that's the kind of things that can be done with this technology now, which is a million light years ahead of what the old school system is. Meanwhile, for the same kind of process in dealing with the conference, we deal with old school type of stuff. We had, and this no criticism against this venue or any other venue. This is the way it is all over the world. They do things like, can you fax your contract, especially internationally? Can you fax a copy of your passport and the contract? Can you wire money, which takes maybe 9 days from the U.S.? And so it's really amazing. Ira was able to pay my assistant in, 30 seconds. And then we're bottlenecked on these old school systems.
Yeah, the financial innovation that this whole Bitcoin world has caused is absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, Coinapult's a small company, not tons of money behind it, and it's one of hundreds of companies doing this kind of thing all over the world, creating these crazy innovations. And that's happened over a 3-year period with people that are not well-funded. And we've seen more financial innovation in the last few years from this than we've seen in the last 40 years from the entire banking industry, with all the hundreds of billions of dollars and teams of some of the smartest people in the world that they have. Why is Bitcoin able to bring all this innovation so quickly where these professional institutions have not? And this has been the hugely important point, that decentralizing the production and control and management of money has brought the innovation that, as David was saying, the Industrial Revolution had once you decentralize the production of goods. You get competition, you get people that can take risks and see very fast profits, and it gives an incentive. So thank goodness that we now have competition and market-based money. We're going to see lots of really amazing things in the years to come.
That's a really great point about the decentralized innovation, and I think you're definitely right that there's probably been more innovation in this space, maybe in the last year, than last many decades in finance. Who knows when the credit card was created? Do you know what year?
I think Diners Club was like the 50s.
54, something like that?
Yeah.
So in half a century, the innovation on a credit card was they moved it from, they used to be paper, and then they made them plastic. And then they put a magnetic strip, and then they put a 3-digit code on the back, and now they have a little embedded chip. If you're in Europe, in America, you still don't have that. That's 50 years of innovation, and Coinapult in 1 year makes it so that you can instantly transfer gold, euros, dirhams, reals all over the world in a second. There's no comparison. It's such a vastly superior system. What other innovations, aside from Coinapult, do you see in this space that you're excited about?
Some of the stuff is already going over my head. I mean, these 2.0 applications and all this sci-fi stuff about decentralized property and things like that. I try to just focus on Bitcoin and the currency and money aspect of it, but this stuff's getting really crazy really fast, and the people who are involved are brilliant, and it's constantly inspiring to get to work with these people. So yeah, I mean, it's exciting to see companies now like Microsoft that are traditionally thought of as software dinosaurs, and even they're catching up to the innovation that is Bitcoin and understanding it. So it's going to be a decade where you go from no one's ever heard of Bitcoin to people are using it, all the time in their daily lives. And we saw a very similar thing with the internet. While you're in the middle of it, it seems to go slowly. It's like, why isn't the whole world using Bitcoin yet? But it takes time for the world change its behavior, and we're already past the most difficult stage for sure.
Microsoft's great. Here's a company that was late getting on the web, and then they made up for it. I mean, let's give a hand to Microsoft, huh? What do you say? I mean, that's cool. To come in and they're constantly reinventing themselves, and they're easy to criticize because they're the 10,000-pound gorilla, but probably everybody in this room uses their products. And multiple products, Xbox, all the Windows apps, Office. I mean, they're Microsoft, and they've changed the world, and I think they're doing a great thing. So it's interesting to see all these companies, all these engineers that you're sort of talking about, all of these innovations, and a lot of that hasn't even had a chance to get started. I mean, some of the companies that you work with and are familiar with are mutual friends who are getting venture funding now. They're barely even hiring people, or have just hired a few engineers now. What do you think is going to be built by these people over the next 6 months to a year? What do you think would be the big killer apps that come out of this space? Seems like every week there's a new announcement.
Yeah, it's always hard to predict what a killer app will be before you see it. Then it's obvious, of course. Companies like Circle have done a really good job of finally making Bitcoin so friendly and comfortable to a normal person that they can get into it. They're not dealing with the cryptography and all the weird blockchain stuff underneath. They just have a website and they have some money in the website, and it's as simple or simpler than PayPal. So that a lot of it is simply making the weird science of Bitcoin into something that the average person understands and uses. And this was, again, the same challenge that the internet had, because a lot of internet technologies existed for 10 or 20 years before people started building useful things like Netscape Navigator that made it useful and friendly for normal people to start using. And we're just starting to see that. This last year is the first real interfaces that are what I would call professional and friendly and simple.
Great. So let's shift gears a little bit here. Politics and Bitcoin have been hand in hand since inception. There's two schools of thought on that. Some people really want to separate it, and some people in Bitcoin don't want to be associated with the sort of libertarian or even anarchist leanings of many core and especially early members of the community. They want to keep it completely separate. Some say it's inseparable because it's part of the DNA of either the community or the technology itself. Where do you stand on that? Maybe you could talk a little bit about what your political philosophy is and what you think its relation to Bitcoin is on the bigger picture, and can you separate those things? Should you separate them?
So first of all, you do not need to be political or care about politics in any way, shape, or form to use Bitcoin and to get the advantages of it. Sending money instantly anywhere for free is a service that is valuable to people of all different ideologies. So they don't have to be necessarily attached, but what is necessarily attached is the implications that will come about if Bitcoin becomes really widespread. What it is you are separating, I like to use the term money and state. In the same way that information production or religion was separated from the state long ago, and most people agree that that's a good step forward for humanity, to have competition among ideas, to have freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, all these things. And yet people still have this idea that money should be controlled by the government. I think future generations will look back at it and say, well, of course, money and state should have been separated for the same reason that speech and state should be separated. And so if you kind of understand how that's going to move, then there are certain political implications of this. If governments cannot control money, they will not have many of the powers that they do today. So that can certainly be controversial. Personally, I think most to all things that states tend to do, because they're based on coercion and violence, are inherently immoral. And Bitcoin is one tool that reduces the scope of activities in which the government can interact with humanity. And that's, I think, a positive social development for all of the world. Lots of people are going to disagree with that, and so that is the struggle. People disagreed when there were people trying to separate church and state, and when people were trying to seek the freedom of speech and pull the control of those realms of society away from a central monopoly into the hands of the people. It was highly controversial when those things happened, and it's highly controversial now in Bitcoin, but that's the struggle that we're all fighting.
But if we reduce the power of government, who would bomb the roads?
They'll still figure out a way.
Yeah. In seriousness, reducing government is very scary to a lot of people. How and that's a play on, for those who don't know, that's a play on the biggest question of who will build the roads without government kind of question.
If all government did was build roads, I really wouldn't have a big problem with them. But that's not really what they do.
Yeah, what percentage is that of our budget? Probably far less than 1%.
Yeah, 1,000th of a percent of all the things that
So
government
you'll
does.
say, in your ideal government, go ahead and keep the roads.
The roads are
Go
not,
ahead and do the roads.
building roads is not the problem. Of course, governments are not the only entity that can build roads.
Right.
Much more complicated stuff has been done by the market. If you look at a computer and how crazy intricate it is and all the pieces and the supply chains and all that amazing stuff that gets figured out and turned into a computer, and now they interact all over the world with each other, that's done by individual businesses figuring out ways to solve problems. And there's no reason to think that roads can't be figured out. They're not that hard.
That's a good point. And we can wonder about things like smartphones, which everybody in this room has one or two in your pocket, and they really didn't exist, especially as we know them today. Just 5 years ago, they weren't anything like what we have now. Could government have done that? If it was a government program to say we're going to put this, we're going to go from SMS capable phone to a full-fledged computer that can play video in your pocket, and this is going to be a government initiative, and we're going to do it. We're even going to cooperate multiple governments in the world. Could they have ever done something like that?
Yeah, well, governments can certainly build useful things, and they can certainly succeed sometimes at some projects. But the question is, should we trust monopolies to bring services to us? We don't, most countries, the government does not produce the food supply and direct the diet of its citizens. This is a good thing. We have competition in food production and delivery, and everyone is very well fed in countries that have developed markets. So why do we assume that it's best to have markets in all these goods and services except for money? Money is perhaps the most important of all goods and services, and thus probably the most important to get away from a monopoly.
So if you were meeting a group of people who you knew were extremely pro-government, pro-state, and you were talking about Bitcoin, would you try and avoid talking about politics, or would you really avoid it, or would you kind of touch on it, or would you maybe even try and convince them of your political things, or would you keep it separate?
You got to talk to the audience that you're in front of. There are people who would disagree with me fundamentally on my political views, but you can still find ways that they can appreciate Bitcoin. For example, in the U.S., most people are very pro-government, but they can still get behind a technology that can alleviate poverty around the world. And the issue of remittances is a really good bridge to speak with such people. The amount of remittances sent from the U.S. to families in other countries is massive, and the fees charged by the companies that provide those services are greater than all of the foreign aid that's given by the U.S. government to those other countries. So if you have Bitcoin, take over the world, and people can now send money for free, the amount of money that these people save, who are often the poorest of the poor, will be greater than all the money that was given to them just in handouts by the government. So you save government tons of money, and you can actually put money back in the hands of the people that need it the most.
Very interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about the foreign aid portion. Most, or I don't know about most, but a good number of Americans are against foreign aid. But that's a great point. If you could save on the remittances, that's a way to have your cake and eat it too, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah, you've made the world more efficient, and now there's more wealth to go around.
Yeah, interesting. What do you worry about in Bitcoin?
My worries get less and less each day, because every day that the experiment continues, it becomes more trusted and there become more users. So when I was first getting involved, it was still highly experimental. There was no, professional finance people involved. There was no big companies involved. So the question was, will this ever get a critical mass? And I think we've definitely passed that point now. I mean, Microsoft is now accepting Bitcoin. That's something that we joked about 3 years ago, on internet forums, like, oh, when will Microsoft accept it? And all these, trolls will come out and say, oh, well, a company like Microsoft would never accept Bitcoin. And it only took 3 years. And there's not many bigger companies than Microsoft that can even do it now. So, what I worry about is mostly government regulation and whether governments will peacefully allow money to be removed from their control or whether they will take a very hardline approach to stop it. And my reading of history is not a positive one in that regard. I think there will be a long struggle, and a lot of people will get hurt. There are already people getting hurt that have been involved in Bitcoin. They've had their property stolen from them. They've been sent to jail. They've had all sorts of bad things done to them because they are simply trying to remove the power of money from government. So that's kind of my worry. I've had my own battles to fight on that regard, but that's part of the struggle. I used to live here in Dubai for 2 years, and I loved the economic freedom here, and so I feel like Dubai, to a certain extent, can be one of those countries that can really lead the way in permitting this financial technology to grow. That remains to be seen, and that's, I think, why we're here to do this, is to kind of guide this region in one direction.
Yeah. It's very interesting how free the markets are in some places in the world. We, as Americans, pride ourselves very much on being the freest country in the world, but for people who look at it objectively and really, not based on slogans or what we're taught as children, but based on objective facts, we're not that free in some ways. And certainly every country has issues, but there are some things where other jurisdictions beat us, particularly on economic freedom. The ability to set up a business here, or Singapore or other places, it's really not much of a comparison. And now it's interesting because we had, if you ask any American what makes America great, a lot of people will say, well, open immigration. We let anybody come there, and you give us, you're poor, you're tired, you're sick, you're hungry, and you can come to work. We are laughing in this room because we have people who are probably very, very educated professionals who still can't meet jobs. I've met people who have billion-dollar net worths who can't get to America. I've met people who went to school in America who have American parents who can't get to America. I've met Americans who have a problem getting into America. I was in line, and somebody was from Arab person from this part of the world, and the customs guy is saying, why are you coming here? It's like, it's my home. I'm American. So, but here we have the Dubai dream. Here you actually can come here if you're poor, you're sick, you're tired, you're hungry. You can come here from Bangladesh or India, and you can become a cab driver, and you can build a fortune. And people are doing that. So, when it comes to sort of overall government thinking and also Bitcoin, whose game is it to lose, and who will win? And how much of that will be regulation? Suppose New York has backed off a bit, but suppose they come out with a fairly heavy-handed approach. What could that potentially cost them relative to a New Hampshire, and what can a heavy-handed approach cost the United States relative to a Dubai or a Singapore?
Well, let's go back to the analogy that is so wonderful for Bitcoin, which is the development of the internet itself. And the internet was generally left alone by governments. Maybe it's because they just didn't understand how freeing it would become for much of the world and how easy information would move around. Or maybe they were wise enough to realize that was something that should be left alone. And the world has benefited hugely from it. So imagine what would have happened if a certain country had banned the internet, and certainly some do. We have examples like North Korea and China that cause all sorts of problems. But their people get excluded from the benefits of the technology, and it's a tragedy, and it's something that I think ultimately will not sustain because people have an inherent desire to be free and to communicate and to trade with each other. So the governments around the world that take a very heavy-handed approach on Bitcoin will see their people not get the benefits of Bitcoin, and that will be really tragic. But what can you do? I mean, for example, Coinapult. We decided early on to have Coinapult leave the U.S. entirely because we did not trust the regulators' sensibilities in terms of how they would handle Bitcoin. And Coinapult not only left the country, but blocks U.S. users entirely, and has for about a year or so, and will continue to do that, because it's just not worth the legal risk to provide services to Americans when the U.S. government is so despotic in certain ways. So this locks thing that we're talking about, you could use it if you're here in Dubai. If you're in Canada, you can use it, but America, the land of the free, is completely blocked from Coinapult, and it's a very sad thing. I'm American. I don't want to have to do these kind of things, but that's what's going to happen. If regulators act imprudently, then the technology will just route around them, and their people won't get the benefits of it.
Yeah, we may see a brain drain of sorts, and we even see it in the U.S. I learned recently that I signed a pledge called the New Hampshire Free State Pledge, and I learned that you signed it, and Roger Ver, who is also an early adopter, a very well-known guy in Bitcoin, also signed it. It's a non-binding pledge, so I'm not 100% sure, if any of the three of us will end up doing it. But I think making the pledge is important. It's basically pledging to move to New Hampshire within 5 years of a certain target, basically because there's less regulation there. And so here you are, in my opinion, a very sharp and leading entrepreneur, especially in this very exciting space. One of the, definitely I think you would make almost anybody's top list of leaders in this space. And you chose to go to the place, as Milton Friedman said, vote with your feet. You chose to go somewhere else. Not only that, but people who could have benefited from a very interesting and innovative product can't do it. I mean, are we going to see that more? What's the world going to look like? Even aside from this technology, are we going to see, people become less, less state-oriented and more fluid? Where if Dubai is the best place, they're going to come to Dubai. If Singapore is the best place, they're going to come to Singapore. We see that a ton in our space.
Well, when you have all these new industries and businesses that operate exclusively on the internet becomes the country. The internet is the place where people are doing the exchange and the communication. And it doesn't matter where your physical body is, the business and the production is happening in this sort of new country of the internet. And so if you have a service that people on the internet want to use, but a certain physical geography tells you that you're not allowed to do that, what are you going to do? You're going to move, because you can move your body and you can still provide service to the several billion people around the world that are on the internet. So the internet is something that gives people sort of a neutral place to interact, and this is very important. And governments are going to have to come to terms with that. They've had to deal with that just in terms of information and speech, but now also they will have to deal with it in terms of money.
Interesting. Yeah, there's one of the countries right here in the Gulf Cooperative Council that had some policies related to hiring locals, and immediately a lot of companies complied by moving their headquarters from one country to another, and a lot of them came here. So we see it, but I think especially in our space because of the nature of it, because it is the internet. And speaking of people building companies, what is your advice for startups? There's a lot of people building in this space, and you're looked to as a leader that has been around a while and seen a lot of things work and not work. What would be your advice to somebody, very early stage startup?
One big important thing for any startup in the Bitcoin area is they have to decide very early on what sort of position they're going to take when it comes to user privacy and that kind of thing. So if you can try to comply with every government law in the world, And that will often run in direct contradiction and violation of things like user privacy. And you have to kind of make a moral decision when you get involved how far down that road you're going to go. And I don't fault people anywhere on the spectrum. There are companies that are going to get very big that have to comply with regulations, and they're going to have to invade their users' privacy. That's one side. And there are companies that run anonymously, people that do not reveal who they are, and they use these amazing tools of cryptography to basically build businesses that are private and that their users can use without exposing themselves to regulations around the world. And that's very good too. But you kind of have to figure that out early on, because you can't really do both. You have to take a position on it.
Can we have a day where people build a business and nobody knows who built the business?
Yeah, there's lots of Bitcoin businesses that nobody knows who runs them, and there will only be more. And not only that, the technology is getting so crazy that there are businesses that nobody's actually running. Bitcoin itself, the network, nobody's running Bitcoin. There's no one in charge of it. There will be more, now that money can move around like that in an automated way with no one in charge, there will be actual businesses that get built that do not have people in charge of them. And it's a very sci-fi notion, but it's already starting to happen.
You've seen Bitcoin price at $1, $2, whatever, single digits, and you've seen it go through ups and downs. And now today it is at 340, right? We have all kinds of price projections all over the place. Some say 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. Where do you see it? What does it take at a couple of the different breakpoints? I mean, where do you see the price going in 1, 3, 5, 10 years? And what do you see at the different breakpoints? What would it take to get to Bitcoin 1,000 or 2,000? How does that compare to, say, a company, like a company that's been acquired? What do you think the value of Bitcoin is and will be? And where do you see the price going? And also, what do you see the price floor being?
People need to understand Bitcoin is a very binary outcome. It can very easily go to zero if the whole experiment falls apart. Maybe people just lose interest, maybe the technology breaks, maybe any number of weird things can happen, and the whole thing will just go away and then Bitcoin will be worth nothing. If that doesn't happen, because it is so useful, it's going to keep growing, and it will have a very high price. And I don't know if that's $10,000 or $1 million or what, but it will be very high. So you have to understand that it's either going to be nothing or it's going to be something very valuable. And the reason that it goes through these bubbles and all this price speculation is because the world is trying to figure out which of those outcomes it's going to be. It's trying to figure out, is this actually going to be here and take over larger and larger swaths of finance, or is it just going to go away? And you get these speculative bubbles and people guessing all the time what the price will be in the future, and there's no way to predict it other than to simply try to see that the system is valuable and that there are only so many coins, and thus if the world continues to adopt it, the price is going to have to be something significant. And most people that are involved in Bitcoin try not to pay too much attention to the price because we've all been through several of these bubbles, and they cause ecstasy and misery and depression. And you got to just kind of set that aside and keep working and building. When I got involved, the price had fallen from $30 down to $2, and this was before any big merchants or anything. So you can imagine the sort of negativity and angst that was in that world. And Bitcoin recovered, and now it's 100 times higher than that, and that was just 3 years ago.
It was declared dead, and
by
many publications.
lots of
they
people.
said, okay, this is an experiment. It was kind of interesting, and it failed.
Yeah, well, when
it's
the
dead
price
and will not recover from the $2.
when the price goes up, people call it a Ponzi scheme, and when the price crashes, they call it dead. And they're always moving the goalposts and trying to figure out ways that they can make fun of Bitcoin. And ultimately, I think it comes from a position that a lot of people don't want to really examine the role of money in their life and why money exists and how we use it and all these things and who controls it and lots of issues that people just don't want to touch. And it's easier if you just make fun of Bitcoin and call it this stupid little magic internet money and a big failure. But it's not failing, it's succeeding.
It becomes increasingly difficult. Professor Williams said that Bitcoin would definitely be at $10 earlier this year. So I'm happy to buy those coins if he has them for sale at $10 a piece. And I think in the face of things like Microsoft, it becomes, how do you criticize that if you're one of these trolls that you mentioned.
Yeah.
It becomes increasingly difficult to make the case, and not even a matter of making fun of it or not, but of really saying, is this real or not? As I said last night, we every day we get further down this road where the likelihood of complete and total failure is a lot less. Microsoft is now putting. Microsoft has so many engineers. They can probably put more engineers on this as a side project. I mean, they could put 50 people, really sharp engineers, on this as a side project, which is more than some of the bigger Bitcoin companies have. These people are going to keep building things, and so that it makes it harder to turn back, I think.
Yeah. Ultimately, you got to just you have to see what the value is, because why is everyone here? Why is there price? Why are people getting tens of millions of dollars of investment? What is the whole point? The point is that now there's a technology that moves money instantly at almost zero cost. And is that valuable? Obviously it's valuable. It's valuable in the same way that email was obviously valuable. To be able to move information and communication for free all over the world at near zero cost is the same reason that Bitcoin is going to be used. And I don't know why some people have such a hard time seeing that, but that's the struggle.
So how many people know Snapchat? Not even a third of the room, but because we're an international crowd here. So Snapchat is used by a small number of a very narrow demographic, basically 13 to 17-year-olds in certain countries who have certain types of phone services to send pictures to each other. And it was acquired for $25 billion. So if all Bitcoin on planet Earth, all of this venture capital, all of this investment, everything that everybody is doing with all of these companies as a global technology in its entire lifetime, over the next 3 years becomes worth as much as Snapchat, we're looking at $2,000-something a coin. So, I think that's just, I don't see, in this binary example, I don't see the likelihood of a scenario where that doesn't happen, which means we win the binary, and maybe it's significantly more than Snapchat.
There is an important point with this, though, and it's not just that if you're skeptical over the Bitcoin price, you don't have to take the position that it's because Bitcoin isn't useful and will fail. You can also take the position that Bitcoin might not be the digital currency or the form of money that everyone is using in 10 or 20 years. And so you might say, well, I don't know if it's going to be Bitcoin, and so the price of Bitcoin might go to zero simply because a different and maybe better form of digital money takes its place, and that's a totally valid argument as well.
So last question, then we'll open it for the audience. Right now we can make I'm betting my career and reputation and money and everything else on this. We can make a pretty good case of it to say, when you have Mark Andreessen and Peter Thiel and every single founder of Facebook and a whole bunch of internet geniuses and Richard Branson, all these people getting on board with the smartest venture capitals and all these engineers, you can make a very, very solid case to say, yeah, this is real. But you started before those days. When did you know this was real?
When I first heard about Bitcoin, I laughed at it and I thought it was really stupid, and I spent about 2 hours reading about it. And then I realized that it had done something that had never been done in the history of the world, which was to make a form of money that no person could control. And that idea really stuck with me, and that's what got me hooked initially. And all it takes is to try it. And once you try it, once you sit with someone at dinner and you send $100 to them on their phone, and you might not even know their name yet, and you compare that with walking down to a bank and filling out a form and waiting 3 or 4 days for that form of digital money to move across the earth, it's clearly real. And the fact that it's not used everywhere yet is that's where the opportunity is. You have to see that something's valuable and the rest of the world hasn't realized it yet. And then that's where opportunity comes from.
Great. So we'll open it for some questions. Greg or Austin, are you here? Great. Could you double check just to make sure? Because we have a special surprise for lunch, courtesy of Circle. Greg, right there. If you could just check if Rami is here. We're going to talk until he's there. That way we can just go straight to our lunch. So there was a few hands. Go ahead again. Yes. You in the black.
Yeah. Hi. These questions might be very naive since I'm new to the space, but can you talk first about where you see the banks going over the next 10, 20 years as Bitcoin becomes more pervasive? And then two, just for this region in the Middle East, where it's still primarily a cash-based society, how can we break through that and make Bitcoin more pervasive in markets like Jordan and Lebanon, and where there's not even mobile money or even credit cards for that matter?
So when it comes to banks, and again, we'll go back to the analogy of the internet. When the internet was coming out, all sorts of businesses were scared of it, and they were trying to figure out, is the internet going to destroy me or what? And certainly it did destroy some types of businesses, but it also created all sorts of new opportunities for other businesses. And there were companies that were successful pre-internet that adapted and now are successful post-internet. Banks will be the same. I mean, Bitcoin is not going to remove banks from the world. It will probably change how they interact with people. It will probably change how money is issued and controlled. But the purpose of banks do many things, and lots of those are still going to be important. Like the ability to make loans to people is a market need that will exist pre-Bitcoin or after. So banks don't need to be scared of Bitcoin. They just need to realize that it's probably going to change how they operate, and they should probably start figuring out ways to adapt to it and to use it to their advantage, because Bitcoin is simply a tool. And anyone that looks into it can probably figure out a way to benefit from this new tool. So that's what banks should be doing. And in terms of how to bring Bitcoin into certain regions, that's often simply up to entrepreneurs in those regions. I don't know how to get Bitcoin adoption furthered in Jordan. Someone in Jordan should probably figure that out. But that's why this creates opportunity all over the world, because different places have different social behaviors, they have different banking infrastructure, and so people in these places have to figure out the challenges that are unique to them.
Lena. Yes. Lena, right? Yeah, could you grab the mic over here? Right here.
I just want to comment on what the lady said. In Lebanon, we do have credit cards, and it's very fertile ground for entrepreneurship. As a matter of fact, I represent the MENA Private Equity and Venture Capital Association, and entrepreneurship is very big in Lebanon, Jordan, and many parts of the Middle East. Just wanted to comment on that. And to you, I would like to ask, coming to Dubai and the UAE, such a great place for also budding entrepreneurs, and the vision of, we know that the government's vision is to boost entrepreneurship in the region, and there are a lot of people who coming up with great programs, including Wanda. Question for you is, have you looked at the regulations here, and what are the regulations that will govern the Bitcoin business?
I'm not an expert on the regulations here. There are now, a year ago I don't think there were any Bitcoin companies. Now we have several sponsors here who are actual local Bitcoin businesses. So they're probably better to answer that question. They're figuring out the regulations, and they'll shape themselves to fit the regulatory landscape that's here in the UAE.
I've talked to the regulators a little bit here, and I've found them to be, as you would expect, and as we've seen in other sectors, very pro-business. Regulators, especially here in Dubai, don't tend to say, why do we want to stop something? They say, why not? Why not allow it? And also you have a different dynamic where we have some well-meaning regulators in the US who really do want to protect consumers. We have some who don't really want to protect consumers. They want to further their own career through headlines or publicity or whatever. You don't really have the latter here, fortunately. So, I think I'm personally optimistic about the regulatory environment here, and hopefully what we will see is what we've seen in some of the jurisdictions, which is a pretty hands-off approach where if I were to advise a regulator, I would say, hey, you know what, let's leave this thing alone for forever, or for at least 5 years or so, give it a chance to see if it works. And if they're not comfortable with that, they could still, sort of encourage the space to say, hey, we're going to leave this alone, but we would like you to voluntarily disclose things. We'd like to watch out and, kind of please don't make us don't make us want to regulate if you keep a clean shop and have self-regulatory procedures in place. So I think I'm optimistic. This place has become what it is from nothing relative to where it is now 15 years ago because of a friendly environment to all kinds of businesses. So I think that's very positive.
There's one really important point with this whole Bitcoin thing is that it's still extremely early, and the technology is evolving in all sorts of weird ways. There are companies that exist today and businesses that I had no idea would exist just a few years ago, things that aren't necessarily using blockchain technology for money, but using it for property and other weird stuff. And so if regulators had come out immediately 3 or 4 years ago and created all their rules and regulations then, they would have already screwed everything up because they wouldn't be able to see how the technology would evolve. And so a wise and prudent regulator should probably wait to see how this grows and changes and then take very careful measured steps at a later date. It's still too premature. It's still an experiment. So let the experiment happen. It's not going to destroy the world, just as the internet didn't destroy the world. And information can be just as dangerous as money. We let information be relatively free, and letting money be relatively free shouldn't be that controversial either.
Cool. Yeah, a couple more questions. Greg, is okay, great. You can bring them right on in here, and we'll. Why don't you bring Rami in and Garrett? And yes, question right here.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask. So a lot of cities these days, they're looking at making themselves a Silicon Valley or a regional Silicon Valley, and I can see. I'm not going to ask you if you think that like a city that makes it that has regulation and it has an environment that is friendly to Bitcoin, if it has a chance to become to have those this outcome, I think that yes. But what I would like to ask you is, what sort of what are the perfect conditions that this place should provide in order to make those to be like a magnet for Bitcoin companies to come in and work out of there, or especially that a lot of things are happening, especially with Bitcoin and with the internet, a lot of things are happening remotely, remote teams, distribution, and so what kind of city or regulatory body offer to make the place conducive to Bitcoin companies?
So I think the question already misses the point. A wise government should not try to figure out what it can do to further business development. The wisest thing it can do is to go back to this 19th century notion of laissez-faire, of let it be, leave it alone. Let people who are incentivized and creative and take risks, let them build. Just let it alone. And that is the best way to let an economy grow. It is the best way to allow wealth to expand. And it doesn't mean that there won't be problems. Business is all about trial and error, and there are many, many failures and big catastrophes. Bitcoin has had its share of scams and frauds, and Mt. Gox collapsed and $400 million was lost. And yet still it is growing, and still it is making things better. Business has a tendency to self-correct. It has a tendency to grow and figure out problems very quickly. And so the best thing a government can do is just let it be.
Great. Yeah, one more. Is it time for one more question? Sure, in the back.
My name is Abimbola, and I'm from Nigeria. Very excited to be here. I'm involved in anti-money laundering consulting, so I'm going to look at it from that perspective. Okay. We all know that technology is a double-edged sword, right? Okay. We are gathered here because of the positive aspect of the Bitcoin technology that we've seen. There's also the negative side, okay, that this platform or this technology that is now being used to store value and is now being used as a medium of exchange can also be used by criminals, okay, to be able to ultimately convert their process of crime and hide it away from law enforcement agency, okay? So government presently is not ever going to just wait and let people take over that kind of technology because they've learned from the mistakes, okay? And we all know that, okay, government is a bit slow to innovation, but they really want to catch up and make sure that they can protect the weak, they can protect the society, okay? So I think in our dialogue, in our conferences, we also need to be very realistic with ourselves, okay? And be sure that we also can provide that kind of control, okay? And look towards the future, okay? Because the more we can provide a very safe and sound environment for this to thrive, the better converts we can get. People now get more comfortable to be able to say, okay, this is a very safe and secure means, okay, that cannot really be abused. So that's just my contribution.
I think the purpose of a good regulator should be to focus on the actual crimes and to stop the crime itself. No one wants people to get hurt. No one wants bad things to happen. No one wants thefts and fraud to occur. So stop those things. Stop the bad things, the actual crime. But don't try to fix every little thing that happens around those criminal activities that enable them, right? A criminal can use a car to cause his crime. That doesn't mean that we should prevent cars from being used, right? It doesn't mean that we should have a road checkpoint at every road to make sure that this person doesn't have a gun in their car. You have to give society a certain amount of freedom and realize that there will be problems. And then, if you are a wise government, find where the actual crime is and stop that. You know, this money laundering thing, money laundering is not a crime. Someone who has money, who might have gotten it from a crime, trying to clean it, that is not a crime. No one's being hurt by that action. Find what the criminal did that was the crime and stop that. That's how you help people. Trying to manage their money will not help them because you will catch everyone else that's not the criminal as well. And this is a very difficult thing, I think, for regulators to do because they want to help. But ultimately, that's my recommendation.
Thank you. My friend, Erik Voorhees.